Thank you for joining us for Pitch Perfect, How to Gain Internal Buy-in. I am thrilled to introduce our presenters. Pat McGovern is Vice President of BVK, a Milwaukee-based full-service advertising and brand agency. Pat brings a unique blend of both client and agency experience to the business. Throughout his career, he's worked across a number of verticals with specific focus on higher education. And current clients include Florida Tech, Westminster College, St. Cloud State University, and Marquette University. Voltaire Santos Moran is the co-founder and co-owner of mStoner. He works closely with mStoner's clients to forge and sustain transformative, memorable, and incredibly effective partnerships. He shapes all aspects of mStoner's individual projects, overall planning, and company-wide management. A natural storyteller, Voltaire enjoys teaching others how to tell stories and using his expertise in information architecture, content strategy, and governance to move institutions from a project mindset to a process mindset. Current clients include McGill University, Northeastern University, and Mills College. Voltaire, I'll turn the session over to you. Let's get started.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mallory. So welcome, everyone, and thanks for taking the time to be with us today. We have basically one goal for this. We want to make sure that at the end of our time together, we will have been able to provide you with useful and actionable information to help you to build a case for taking a different path, is the way we would describe it, a brand to website project done best. And hopefully, in our time together, you'll be inspired to dream big and empowered to effectively gain buy-in and really promote this process and champion this process throughout your institution. So we've got 4 topics that we want to cover in the course of the day. The first is the state of the art. The second is a different path. The third is process and timeline. And the fourth are tips for building the case. And what we'd like to do is begin with a question. So everyone, please answer this in the chat room. What's the one word that you'd use to describe the state of your brand today? The one word you would use, please.
Cool. We're getting lots of responses in the chat room, Voltaire. Everything from incoherent and aging to patchwork. Solid. We had a solid, although some are saying
awesome.
Non-existent. So it's a mixed bag.
All right, fair enough. Well, that's a really interesting segue into the state of the art. Pat, let me turn this over to you to talk about the sea of sameness, please.
Thanks, Volt, and thank you everybody for being here. I'm super psyched about just having the opportunity to talk to you about this. This is such a critical time in higher ed, and we're really hoping that what we have to share with you today inspires you and gets you moving on the right path. When you start thinking about your website, your brand, the words you use to describe it, the images you choose to use, higher ed is facing a bit of a problem. There is a sea of sameness. Guys, please take a look at the screen in front of you, right? Look at all these different phrases here. These are being used across the board. Rigorous academics, experiential learning, the start of a rewarding career, friends that you'll make for life, strong and loyal network of alumni. Our favorite, no, really, we really have passionate students. No, our faculty is really passionate about this. Guys, the issue that we have here is that we're focused on features and benefits. We're not saying this is wrong by any means. It's just part of the picture. It's an incomplete story. What we're going to talk about a little bit today and start touching on it is how do we get to that next level, right? Well, let's go to the next slide.
Absolutely. Hold on just a second. Oh, whoopsie. I love when technology works. There we go. Oh, and back. Sorry, Pat. There you go.
Thank you. So think about it this way. And we love this quote. If you talk to a man in a language he understands, that goes to his head. Talk to a man in his language, it goes to his heart. What we're trying to do today is talk about how do we connect with the heart and connect emotionally, right? And that's what a little bit about what we're going to be laying out here for you.
Oh, great. Thanks, Pat. So as Pat was talking about the sea of sameness in terms of messaging for branding, I want to show you this wireframe. And it's what I call the Universal College and University homepage. And many of you might find this familiar. So it starts with a header with a couple of rows of navigation. There's a carousel or a big photo or a drone video. The ubiquitous calls to action, request information, visit, apply, and give. 3 news items, 3 events items, by the numbers, 3 profiles, a social media aggregator, and a FAP footer. I'm going to pause for a second to let that sink in, and then I'm going to ask people to take a poll, please. So the poll is this. On a scale of 1 to 5, how closely does your website resemble this wireframe?
All right, and that poll is launched. We have answers coming in as we speak. I'm just going to let it run for a few more seconds as people vote. My personal favorite answer is 5, which is, wait, did you just copy our website? And I have to say, Voltaire, we're getting a lot of votes on that one right now. All right, so I'm gonna give it 4, 3, 2, and end poll. Here's the results. Only one person voted that they were light years away, yet more than half of our attendees fell in on scale 3, 4, or 5.
Fair enough. And that's, we face that a lot in the work that we do. And this is a quote that I hear almost all the time when we're out starting a new project. If you take our logo away from our header, we'd look like every other university website out there today. And I think that there are a number of reasons for that. The first is that I think that in higher education, we like to look at what everyone else has done and use that as a benchmark for what we want to communicate. So there's a little bit of that sort of everyone's doing it syndrome. There's also not a small grain of truth, a fairly large grain of truth, the fact that as we are looking at what is a complex sale for prospective students, we are all pretty much trying to sell the same things because they are looking for those experiential learning opportunities. They're looking for chances for leadership. They want to have a global network of alumni that they can plug into. So there's a certain sense of this is what people are looking for, so we need to have that content there. But I would think the most insidious reason is because a lot of times when we launch a website, we really haven't articulated the brand of the institution in a way that is truly differentiating. And when one has to grasp for what to say about one's institution, one normally will end up regressing to the norm, which is why I think a lot of institutions take that path in terms of developing their homepage. So what we want to do today is introduce a different path to you. And that different path looks a little like a values-based approach. So Pat, if you would talk about this, please.
Yeah, thanks, Walt. So, I teased it a little bit before about features and benefits, but where we're going and where this industry needs to go is beyond features and benefits. Again, let me be clear. I'm not saying that that doesn't have a place. It certainly does. It's just an incomplete story that we're telling, right? We want to focus beyond that and really understand the institution's DNA. And this is something I just want to hang on here for a minute. As we begin to work with different colleges and universities throughout the country, it's not a matter of creating what that DNA is. It's already embedded. What we're doing a lot of times is dusting off and putting a spotlight on what is really going to resonate. What has been your key emotional driver that's just been forgotten for years or has been pushed aside for whatever reason? We want to tap into an emotional connection. Right? If we feel we can connect emotionally, we got a chance to start a conversation. Look, there is a growing body of evidence in neuroscience that says we make the majority of our decisions based on emotion. I've seen numbers as high as 80% of all the decisions, buying decisions that we make are based on emotions. And that number jumps to 90% when you talk about certain categories. Wine, spirits, alcohol is certainly one of those. Additionally, we use this approach because this is a way to get everybody on board. What is very, very unique about the higher ed space is this. You have to appeal to not only a number of different stakeholders with a number of different agendas, but just let's put that aside. Let's look at the demographics. You have to appeal to a 17 and 18-year-old students on one end and somebody who may be 60 plus on the other end. There are few brands I know that have a challenge like that. And a values-based approach, finally, is holistic activation. We're not talking about doing this so we could create a better looking view book or a better looking postcard. We're talking about everything, all communications tying into this.
Good deal. Thanks, Pat. And tailing off of that values-based approach is this digital-first approach. So I released an intelligence article a little bit earlier this week that talks about taking a digital-first approach to executing your brand. And there are really 4 reasons that we think that that's important. Now, typically, what we've seen for brand projects is brand research and brand activation starts with a discrete project like a print view book. But we really think that institutions should look forward and beyond that and really take a digital-first approach. Why is that? The first is because your website is going to have more reach and more impact than a view book or billboards or digital ads. The second is that a website relaunch requires you to think through issues of visual identity, issues of brand execution, issues of storytelling that you don't have to think through to the same scale as you would if you were doing a print piece. So it gives you a much stronger foundation for activating and executing your brand across channels if you're handling the biggest channel that you have, your flagship communications vehicle first. The third is that we all know that website projects are really heavy lifts. And if people are already enthusiastic and excited about the branding work that's happening, then you can ride that wave. You can use that same enthusiasm to propel a web relaunch forward. And then finally, websites will provide, in my opinion, the most immediate return. In research that we did a few years ago on what it was that compelled institutions to take on branding projects, what we found is that normally there were issues of increased competition, dropping enrollment, dropping admissions. And in the face of those things, what you want to do is be able to see results as quickly as possible. And we believe that there is no channel that can be as fast as your website in generating strong results across admissions, alumni relations, development, and in terms of reputations and rankings. So how does that all look? What we want to show you is the typical process and the approach that we would recommend. So Pat, I would love for you to talk through, please, what a typical brand to web relaunch looks like.
Sure, right, and this is what it looks like. So, you know, at one end, you begin with the brand development, and this is kind of the traditional type of approach. You begin with a brand development piece, and X amount of months, 6 months is within reason. You begin brand execution, which begins, again, using the view book production as a benchmark, would begin at the 9-month mark. And then after that, you see where website production begins, and then you have a period of time before you go live. So in total, using a typical kind of approach and a standard type of way of operating that everybody has done for a while, you're talking about a 24-month cycle. There's a better way. Well,
Will do. And Pat, is there a way that you can increase the volume on your telephone?
Yep, I just
That
did.
would be great. Perfect, thank you. So like Pat was saying, a typical approach basically takes 24 months from the time that a brand research project begins to the time that a site goes live. So let's zoom into that. Let's take a look at what the first 6 months look like. So typically in a brand research and concept development phase of a project, discovery will begin on month one, and 6 months later, concepts will be approved. Now, in between discovery and concept approved, there's usually qualitative and quantitative research. There is focus group research. There's the sort of secondhand research that institutions might have already conducted, and that all tails into a strategy phase where the strategy is articulated. So that's what a brand research and concept development project looks like in the first 6 months. Here's what a web research and concept development project looks like. Uncanny how you can basically go from one slide to another and see absolutely no change, because the process, frankly, is the same. When you are doing a website project, discovery begins in month 1, and that begins with focus groups, that begins with stakeholder meetings. We sometimes conduct qualitative and quantitative research. We create a web strategy for the site, and by the end of month 6, we have concepts approved. So the dirty truth about this is that the process is largely the same for a website relaunch and a brand relaunch. And what happens a lot, what we see with clients a lot, is they'll start with a brand project. They'll take 6 months, maybe 8 months to do the research and the brand articulation, approve the concepts. By month 9, they'll launch the view book. And then over a year later, they'll begin the work on what is arguably the most important marketing and communications piece that they have. In that amount of time, all of your stakeholders will be going through the same sets of meetings and being asked largely the same sets of questions. So what we have started to do is take this new approach, this idea that you do both the brand and web research at the same time, that the concepting phase is really digital first. So instead of seeing billboards and digital ads as part of the concepting, what we really start with is, how do you execute this brand on your web? By month 6, we're actually in the work of executing both brand and web. The view book can launch or start production in month 9, but go live can happen in month 13. So in this new approach, you are theoretically able to shave off 11 months from the process, make the process much more seamless, and in the course of this, save a good deal of money and churn as well. So let's talk about how you build the case for something like this, because this is really a different approach than most people are using. We've got 6 tips for you. So the first tip is find the window of opportunity. So in all of the work and the research we've done, we find that there are basically 4 main windows of opportunity that institutions have for taking on a project such as this. So the first is new leadership. There's nothing like a new president, or the first ever chief marketing officer, or a new VP of marketing or admissions or advancement coming on board that will spur a project like this, either a brand research project or a website project, usually both. The second opportunity is institutional shifts. So name change. I worked for Trinity College and Trinity Evangelical Divinity School back in the mid-90s. And at one point, we became Trinity International University. And at that point, we had a whole new visual identity. We had a new logo. We had new ways of talking about the combined entities. Actually, we started a law school and a graduate school, too, because the name change wasn't enough. So institutional shifts are a really great window of opportunity to be able to rally people around and say, wow, as we change, we need to know how to talk about ourselves. Milestone anniversaries are a really great time, normally because they anchor to big anniversary events and capital campaigns. Growth or shrinkage in the institution is also a window of opportunity. And finally, mergers. As we see more and more institutions coming together in the efforts to continue to serve their audiences, there is the need to find out, number one, how do you talk about a merged institution? And number 2, how do you visually present that? The third window of opportunity are seismic shifts. So we all know that brand projects usually get spurred by changes of demographics. And I think that everyone is worried about the drop in college-aged prospective students across the country. And everyone's very excited about the increase in the non-traditional and continuing ed learner. We know that when employment rates go down, people tend to work, but when unemployment rates go up, people tend to go back to grad school. And one of the things that we heard most in the research we did with institutions starting brand projects was that increased competition was the major factor in saying, wow, we really need to figure out how to tell our story and how to tell our story differently. Finally, and this is something a good friend of mine said to me, Volt branding is a long-term commitment. It is not a short-term fix. But the fact of the matter is that numbers tend to push people, right? So when we're looking at enrollment issues, when we're looking at retention issues, when we're looking at drops in giving, when we're looking at the need to either hold our place in the rankings or to climb up the rankings, again, those are things that make people, particularly in senior leadership, say, well, what else can we do? And what else can we do should include brand research, brand articulation, and a website launch. So the second tip that we have is to play the long game through education. So one of the things we know is that education is crucial to any sort of project success. And in fact, there's a lot of pre-gaming that goes on before any sort of proposal for a project like this even gets formalized. And the education has 4 different components. Number one, what is a brand? People all say we need a new brand, but some people think a brand is a logo. Some people think that the brand is a font or color, and some people think that the brand is the tagline. And really, a brand is none of those things. In helping people to understand why branding is important by explaining immediate impact, long-term benefits, and the cost of not doing this work is really important. Talking about what it is that is part of the branding effort, so positioning, strategy, toolkits, and training. And then finally, what is the process? Stakeholders tend to want to know how will they be involved and how do we ensure that this branding project that's going to cost a great deal of money and take a good deal of time is really inclusive and serves the needs not just of undergraduate admissions, but across the entire institution. And so a good process includes that qual and quant research, that secondary research, the stakeholder meetings, and all campus engagement, not just in the very beginning, but throughout the process. And it's important to reassure people, particularly those important stakeholders, that they will have a voice and they will be part of the process. Third tip is cast the vision for painting a vivid picture of success. So 4 things that we have heard in the past. This idea of a campus community with swagger. So one of the promises of a good project done right is that you will all be able to tell your story with pride and confidence. Pat, I would love for you to say a little bit about one of the clients that you've been working with recently where you used exactly that word swagger in terms of the sort of positive change that was brought about through the process.
Yeah, sure. And this is one that's still ongoing, but it's a great story. And there's a noticeable difference. And the school was St. Cloud University in Minnesota. It was a school that had a very proud history, but just in recent years kind of lost their mojo. What do we stand for, guys? What are we all about? We kind of do some things right, but there wasn't anything to really unify us. The new campaign is just really, well, but a swagger back in their step. And so things are really, really looking up for the school at this point. And we're hoping that it leads to other things as the brand rolls out.
Good deal. Thank you. And Pat, if I can ask you to turn your volume up just a little bit more again, that would be great. So 3 other things that I want to cover and in this tip 3, communications that reflect you. One of the main complaints that we hear from institutions all the time is that their materials don't reflect the quality of the institution and don't communicate with authenticity. So part of the promise of a project done like this is that finally you will have materials that reflect who you are as an institution. Thirdly, that you will no longer be the hidden gem that no one knows about. So we will raise awareness and build prestige. And finally, this idea of one voice, one look, and one feel. This really interesting experience at a current clients when we were doing discovery. This was a couple of weeks ago. And I was talking to someone from admissions, and admissions said to me, well, we have this really great donor, and he's all in. He loves the school. He hosts these events for prospective employees who are students of the college. He hosts these events for prospective students, and he talks with alumni all the time and invites them into his office. And he, at one point, pulled the admissions counselor or the admissions person aside and said, you know, it really drives me crazy to hear the differences between the way that admissions and advancement and alumni relations present the institution. It's like I'm hearing about three completely different institutions when those different areas talk about who you are. And that's part of what a great branding project does, is it basically gives you the tools to talk with one voice, to have one look and one feel, and to create that seamless experience. So whether you're a prospective student or a current student or an alum and a donor and ambassador for the institution, you have that understanding of who your institution is, why your institution matters, and why it's important for you to be engaged. And that is all part of a project done right. Pat, could I ask you to cover the next few slides, please? Tell us about the must-haves.
Yeah, the must-haves. So along with what Volt just talked about, you know, there's a few other things that levers, let's say, that you should keep in mind as you are putting together your pitch. And part of this is focusing on larger institutional goals, right? Marketing, brand, web development aren't going to be separate. They're going to fit into the larger overall plan. Moreover, they're going to help drive that and kind of push that marketing has a seat at the table now, right? So this is, you know, we need to tie into that and be able to tell senior executives, this is important and it's going to help out not just marketing, not just alumni, everyone, right? We want to talk about preaching scalability and sustainability. And what we mean here is this. People will have and will be able to probably determine, yes, we could afford X, but 3 years down the road, I don't want you coming back to me again and going, hey, well, I'm going to need another investment in order to continue this on. No, a good project should be able to scale, right? Moving from year to year to year and build things out. As you're talking about this too, you need to highlight, look at the pace of change is quickening. We talked about this earlier, demographic shifts that are happening right now, right? Continue things are going to be happening, especially with higher ed. Higher ed has been very stable and very flat for years, but that is all turning upside down. You have to be aware of it, and now is the time to react. And finally, you have to understand what the competition is doing, right? The Alabama effect. I don't know if anybody in the audience here is from Alabama, but they've got an amazing story that's going on. In a relatively short period of time, they have become a total national player. And one of the steps they're doing that is they've really ramped up their merit-based scholarships. 10 years ago, it was about 8.3 million. Today, it's over 100 million. I live in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I can't believe the number of students and prospects that are considering Alabama as an institution. Just the distance alone. But things like that are going on. And that's not the only player, but they're doing it probably the best. So as you think about and as you move forward and as you build your case, these are also points you want to hit. Step 5 is convince through collaboration, right? This is key. Most institutions, most people we talk to are working in a decentralized environment, which has both good and bad points. But here, what you want to get across is you're bringing everybody together. You got to keep a couple things in mind. You're not only going to help with enrollment and advancement, and they're all going to have a seat at the table, but other areas as well. Not only will there be a consistent message, but you want to bring them into the fold, because as we all know, everybody is going to want a seat at the table and a little bit as to what's going on with this. If we're talking about a new brand, if we're talking about a new website, having their buy-in, having their support, and at a minimum, having their understanding of what you're doing and why you're doing it is going to help out so much down the road. I've seen it play out so many times. When it doesn't happen, it's a train wreck. When it does happen, the process is a lot more smooth. And then finally, invoke the success of other institutions. So we're going to transition here and give you a couple case studies of things that have worked. These are some of these schools that we've been involved with. Excuse me. So I'll give you a little bit of a lowdown on this and what we're seeing. In addition, there's also a great book by Jim Stengel called Grow that really maps out when people and organizations move to a value-based platform. You could see the results from that as well. That's outside the category, but I mentioned that as well. So in the case of MSU, their objective was to increase alumni engagement in capital campaign donations. Now, MSU has got their difficulties right now. But for one thing, back then, when we started working with them, they really didn't need help with getting students in there. But their alumni base, they weren't doing anything with that. Moreover, they wanted to switch that and elevate their brand from just a sports institution to beyond that. So the results from our efforts, 2017 and 2018, you can see there. 90,000 new unique visitors to the Spartans Will page, and they have exceeded their goal of 1.5 billion capital campaign in just under 3 years. Now, can we, ensure that this happens for every institution? Of course not. But the power of the brand can drive some of this, and maybe you can use some of these as benchmarks for your story.
Absolutely. And Pat, remind us what who the author of the book Grow is, please.
Sure. It's Jim Stengel, Stengel. Jim was the former CMO of Procter & Gamble, and when he retired, began and continued this study of what makes brands great. It's a fascinating book, guys. If you're into marketing books and business books, I highly recommend it. It's very, very accessible.
Very cool. And it does a really great job of explaining how values-based positioning is so different from other ways of positioning within categories. So just to add to Pat's endorsement, if you like that sort of stuff, you'll love this book. Pat, tell us a little bit about Texas Christian, please.
Yeah, so again, this was a school that in terms of enrollment, they were doing pretty well, but they didn't have a cohesive brand. A number of colleges, everybody speaking about the brand a little bit differently. We brought them all together, created the Lead On campaign, and so far it has gone amazingly well. Successful rollout across all colleges, and most recently it was ranked one of the top student engagement brands by the Wall Street Journal. So student engagement is basically, let me think of the best way of putting this. It's basically a net promoter score by students about the university, right? So this was what students are saying about TCU, and part of the branding is certainly helping them out. So those two first situations are talking about kind of bigger kind of objectives. In the next case study, it was really about driving applications. Now, for this one, Bryan and Stratton is a for-profit school. And there's a lot higher ed could learn from for-profits, right? In this case, our objective was to increase website visits and applications and campuses, applications for both campuses and online. Bryan and Stratton has both. And you can see after the first year of the brand campaign, a 97% increase in web visits and a 31% increase in on-campus and online applications. We could drive people there, and that's what we've been doing. And it's about branding, and it's about connecting on an emotional level. We'll talk about some of your stories.
Thank you very much. So a few examples that we have for UNCSA. It's one of my favorite sites ever that we worked on. And the objective here was to create a web presence that really communicated what made the UNCSA experience unique and rich. And the expression of their brand was in this idea of, we promise this, you'll do what we love, you'll do what you love. The really interesting about the research that we did is we found that one of the main concerns for people going to a school like UNCSA is that they didn't want to spend 2 years in a classroom talking about and learning about theory before actually creating. They wanted to be artists then and now. And so much of the website is built around delivering on this promise of, from day one, when you get to campus, you will be engaged in creating, you will be engaged in producing, you will do what you love. And all of the videos, the photography, even the micro animations really hinted at and displayed and highlighted student work and students in action. And the results were fairly amazing. Social media referrals increased 96%. Admissions inquiries went up 518%. Online giving increased 48%, and applications to the School of Filmmaking specifically increased 37%. Medill, and I have to give a shout out to Mallory, recent graduate of the Integrated Marketing Program at Medill. So Mallory, I'm proud of a Medill alumni as well, or alumnus as well. So for Medill, the goal was to launch an intuitive website that conveyed the institutional brand and visual identity. And so with the site, we talked about stories and storytelling and becoming the best storyteller you could be. And after launching the site, we found that the undergraduate admissions applications went up by 25%, and that's in this current cycle. And then one final reference is Rush University. And Rush University was a really interesting project because before we started with them, they were called Rush University, but they were really a number of different schools operating within their own silos. And one of the things that the head of this project, one of the visions he had, was to create a one Rush narrative. So rather than operating as these four disparate institutions that happen to have Rush University on top of the website, that they really began to tell the story of what it was to be a Rush student, whether you're in the School of Nursing or in the medical school. And we were able to help them to do that. And one of the things we saw, one of the big results immediately, was within the first month of launch, Rush received 2,000 new admissions inquiries, and the overall traffic is up 20% year over year. So again, as Pat said a little bit earlier, a brand project and a website project can't ensure immediate results in terms of enrollment, immediate bumps in terms of giving, but they do have a really massive effect on the perception of the institution, and they do lead, I believe, to greater enrollment, greater giving, greater pride in the institution. And that brings us to the idea of what's next. So Mallory, let me turn this over to you.
Terrific. Thanks so much. And thanks for the shout out, Volt. I appreciate it. Voltaire, Pat, this was an awesome session. I think those steps in particular are just really helpful for folks who are looking to wrap their head around how they can build a persuasive pitch. So really great content, awesome proof points, and thank you so much. So before we jump into Q&A, folks, it's definitely a great time to send those questions in. I'd like to go over a few resources, and also just a friendly reminder, don't forget to fill out that quick webinar survey. SurveyMonkey estimates it's only going to take you 3 minutes. So if you've got 3 minutes to spare, we would definitely value your feedback, and thank you in advance for that. I'll chat out a link in just a moment, and we'll, as I mentioned earlier on the webinar, we'll be emailing you as well right after we conclude today. So today's webinar was actually the first of our 4-part summer webinar series with BVK. The next webinar takes place on July 24th and is focused on brand architecture and building an enduring brand. We'll cover values-based marketing and how this approach has created incredible success both inside and outside of higher ed. Then in August, we'll conduct a webinar on storytelling and integrated marketing campaigns, really focused on how to develop a storytelling strategy that is on brand. The series will conclude on September 6th with Pitch Perfect 2, Enter the Shark Tank. I am really excited about this one, y'all. 3 institutions will have the opportunity to pitch their project to an expert panel of judges and a live audience. The winner will receive an entire day of consulting from mStoner and BVK, where we'll come to your campus and conduct both a customized big brand theory workshop and a customized digital storytelling workshop. This is going to be a ton of fun and I think really helpful and instructive for both the teams that pitch as well as the live audience. So you have a choice to make. Will you submit an application, or do you want to join and vote from the live audience? We are looking for institutions that are ready to push the envelope, chart new territory, and take their brand and communications to the next level. So if that sounds like you, we really hope you'll consider applying to pitch your project to our expert judges. I will be sharing the links to all of this good stuff, the summer series, the contestant application page, and that'll all go through the chat room in just a moment. We're also sharing it on Twitter in case you're following us over there. And finally, if something you heard today piqued your interest and you want to brainstorm or talk more, get in touch with me. I would love to hop on the phone and talk about your challenges or just simply bounce ideas around. So I'll share a link shortly that gives you some options for getting in touch, but you're also welcome to just shoot me an email, tweet me, Instagram me. I mean, there's 8,000 ways to get in touch these days, right? Who needs a phone? No. So I'll be sending out a link and my email address in just a moment. But seriously, y'all, I'd love to chat. So take me up on that. All right, let's move into Q&A. I've got a really great queue of questions ready for the two of you, Volt and Pat. I hope you're ready for it. And folks, if you don't forget, if you want to send in some questions, we've got a solid 15 minutes to sit and answer them. So I'm just going to kick this off with a question for the both of you. You would put up that new way slide, right, where you've got the brand and the digital first kind of mentality, and it's a new approach. That seems like a really smart approach, and I'm curious, why don't more institutions take it?
That is a really, really great question, Mallory. I'll start and I'll ask Pat to chime in. So I think that there are a few reasons that most institutions don't follow that plan. The first is that I find that these projects tend to be sponsored by different offices. So the owner of the budget for the brand project, for instance, is not necessarily the owner of the website. And as we know, institutions of higher ed sometimes operate in silos. So one major reason that this doesn't happen is because the people who have the funding for this aren't working in collaboration. The second reason, I think, is that people, rightly so, tend to want to work with best of breed. So they want to work with the best branding company out there, and then they want to work with the best website company out there. And they aren't necessarily the same thing, which is part of why this partnership, this strategic partnership with BVK, it excites us so much, is the fact that together we are best of breed and we're able to take this approach, which doesn't typically happen. I think the third, and this is honestly probably, I don't know what percentage I would assign to this. I think that a lot of institutions face the need to serialize this for budget reasons. So they're able to free up X number of dollars within this fiscal year, and then they have X number of dollars in the next fiscal year. And so from the institutional standpoint, what makes more sense is let's spread the cost of the pain out over fiscal years. And I think that it's a reality. And I don't mean this to be glib, but I think that in some ways it's penny wise and pound foolish, because while you're spreading the cost out over a couple of years, you're not realizing the cost benefit of taking this and approaching this in an integrated way. And you're not getting the results that you want until after 24 months, right? So to me, if it's possible for an institution, and that's part of building this really good case, is how do you show that taking this new approach is in the long run better for an institution than spreading out the fiscal responsibility? So Pat, what would you add, please?
Boy, you really hit on it, Volts, and that's excellent. I really can't add too much other than this. From my experience, it appears that, and this is changing, I think schools in general have just looked at digital as following print. Pure and simple. Mm-hmm. And that's changing now, but for years, the website has been just kind of a second place type of channel, where we know it's the main focus. This is where people go to find out what's about the institution, what's going on, really get a sense for it. So that's what I would add.
Great.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That actually leads in really nicely to our next question. We have at least one attendee, although my guess is this situation is not reserved to just the person who's asking the question, but we have an attendee who's noting that they don't actually have a great marketing plan. They don't even have a marketing department, everything's handled under community relations. And, there's just some general lack of understanding around what branding is. And, our attendee is fighting the good fight, right? But how can she or he work with those non-marketing friends that you mentioned earlier that are across campus, the academic units, advancement, et cetera, and really convince them that the university brand needs to be a priority and, in fact, prioritized over those other individual sub-brands within the institution?
That's a good one. Well, you want to take that, or you want me to go?
I'll let you start this one first, please.
Okay, sure. So that's a common one. I mean, this is a fight that you're not the only one in this boat. Marketing, well, let's put it like this. I would go back to some of the points that we talked about already. What's happening on a macro level? What are other institutions doing? Take a look at what's also happening outside of higher ed, right? In the focus on branding and connecting emotionally as well, and see what's going on there. The world is evolving. Right? You can't keep operating in as a series of messages that kind of talk about the brand, kind of talk about the institution, but never really hit there. I think dollars could be more effectively spent by connecting all of it together and telling a cohesive story. And that's going to benefit all those departments. So it's not a zero-sum game. It's just a plus, plus, plus in my book. And we've just seen it happen. I mean, there's case after case after case of brands that come out that stand for something that really, really evolve and capture people's attention and as well as pocketbook.
And what I would add to that is that I think it comes back to the idea that we talked about a little earlier of education and helping people to understand what a brand is and why it's important, and showing some really relevant examples that both explain and help people visualize how branding works and why it's important, but also gives some good results. And I think that there's nothing as honestly, there's nothing as effective as building a relationship with the different areas that you're trying to convince, and getting a level of trust and buy-in over time by continuing to educate and to show examples. But that's a steep uphill climb if there isn't a department that's already in place that has been charged with branding, and if people don't have a sort of unified view. The one other thing that I would add, and this came out of the research study that we did on the state of branding in education institutions, is your leadership's buy-in and direct involvement are crucial. So your president needs to buy into the philosophy. Your president needs to really think that the institution needs this, and she needs to champion this and say to everyone on a consistent basis that this is a priority, and show that the brand that's being developed is one that she endorses and feels very strongly about.
Let me just add one other thing. Within the last, I'd say, 5 years of attending the AMA Higher Education Symposium, what's happened in that is the story of brands has gone from a little bit of a discussion to a major focus over 5 years. So it's happening. I mean, it's there. Higher ed is catching on. So hopefully, because other institutions are doing this, that makes your job a little bit easier as well, hopefully.
Great. Great. Well, this actually leads in really nicely into the next question that I have. Are there any processes or exercises that a team or an institution can go through to help really get everybody on the same page with their brand communications? For me, like an experience map workshop, right, kind of instantly comes to mind, Volt, but I'll toss this one over to you. What exercises or processes would you recommend?
Pat, would you like to talk about the big brand theory?
Sure. So let me just drill down a little bit further. Are we talking about setting this up in order to execute something, or are we talking about after the brand has been established?
Let's say both.
Okay. So again, first off, where I think it's very simply, and without getting into processes, and it'll take up a lot of time, but I think very simply is this: is going around and getting people's opinion on what does our brand stand for? Why is it different? Why are people coming to school here? What do we stand for? Right? Ask different areas. Compare. What are people saying? That I think is a great indication. If they're not close to the same thing, there's an issue, right? So that in and of itself, simple though it may be, is very, very powerful and speaks volumes. Now, let's fast forward. Let's say the brand has been developed. Let's say the web is in place. What we like to do then is begin a series of steps to kind of grow the brand from the inside out. Let's be honest here, guys. If there's not buy-in across all departments on the brand, the platform, where things are going, it's not going to resonate outside of the institution. So what we try to do is help by developing training methods for how do we get brand ambassadors on board? What are we doing? Why have we done this? And so we walk through a series of steps, some presentations and some just documentation that tells people who are not closely associated with the brand what has been happening, why it's been happening, where the brand's going, the importance of brand, etc. Right? We can't get insulated too much in the marketing area, just assuming that everybody knows what a brand is and how important it is. So these series of documents helps walk through people outside of the area to get their buy-in and get, I guess, also people who are new to the institution. What's the brand all about? So for example, faculty come in. How do we get them involved with this? How do we get them excited about what we stand for and where we're going? So it's a series of documentation that we go through and use that whole kind of brand ambassador program. Bolt, anything to add on to that?
I think as I was listening to you, I reflect again on this idea, as you were mentioning, of just getting people involved and talking. So some of the most success I've seen is when you develop a sort of a brand workshop like you were talking about, and you take it on the road, right? You use that same framework from office to office to office, and it becomes a bit of an iterative process. So the first part of it might be, let's talk about where we think we are perception-wise, and then have another workshop that pushes that a little bit further, and then a third workshop when language and visuals are cemented. So it really is this iterative, does this feel like us? Does this sound like us? Is this right? And getting people together for that. It reminds me a lot, honestly, of when we do website work, because a lot of website work is about creating a digital presence that everyone can rally around and feel good about and see themselves as part of. And the way that we do that in the website work is we keep people involved through the process. We get their input at the very beginning. We pull stakeholders into follow-up experience map workshops and persona development workshops. We get feedback from community members when we're developing concepts, and then we keep them informed throughout the process. Because to a certain extent, we're also re-educating them and teaching them about what they can expect for their resources as the site relaunches. So I really think it is about developing an engagement and communications plan that pulls people in throughout the process.
So I have a great follow-up question from a few of our attendees, actually, who are noting that throughout the process that you just described, you might get answers from both internal and external constituents that are quite different, right? And so is one side correct and the other side wrong? Is neither correct? If it is one side, how do you bring the other side along to help them get convinced in this process? Pat, have you run into that?
Yeah, of course. When you're asking people, again, the different groups you're going to connect with and talk to are going to have a slightly different take on this. Here's the good news. That's all important. That goes into, those are all building blocks but those should all ladder up to something bigger. You know, earlier in the presentation, I talked about how a brand platform needs to connect with not only the 18-year-old potential student, but the 60-plus-year-old alumni, right? And a good platform and a good brand can do that. So the fact that it's not, that people are talking about it, well, I think it's this, I think it's that, are all pieces where the science and art comes in, is taking all those disparate pieces and crafting a complete story that resonates with all different groups.
Makes sense. Voltaire, anything to add?
What he said.
Great. One of our attendees is curious. I'm sure that there are examples of brands that have emerged through, you know, various admission, enrollment, or development focused campaigns, and the conversations that happen in the development of those campaigns versus, you know, the approach that we're recommending is going in the other direction. Do you have any examples of successful brands that may have emerged through a campaign like that, or a situation where that's worked out well for an institution?
I can think of, as Pat is searching his memory bank as well, I can think of a number of institutions where the website project has driven the articulation of the brand. But what I found is that one example, we did work with the American University in Paris several years ago, and we came up with a framework to talk about them that was at home in the world. And they embraced it, they really loved it, they leveraged it for a very long time in their website. And you know, as we talked about a little bit earlier, the process of developing the way to talk about an institution on their website very much mirrors the one that you use when you're developing a brand platform. But what I find is that when things evolve organically like that at a certain point the institution wants to validate or the institution wants to refine, and at that point they begin a formal process for doing qual and quant research and taking what was a really great idea for the website and either refining it or shifting it to be applicable beyond the website. So that's where I've seen that happen the most, is where people need to launch a website before they've gotten the chance to do any brand research. They don't have the budget or they don't have the institutional buy-in to do branding, but they can get the buy-in to do a website. And sometimes we see some really great ideas emerge there. It's very hard without taking that sort of brand and web at the same time framework to make sure that it's not just a really great thing to show on a website. Pat, what would you add to that?
Boy, yeah, I would agree, Volt, is that in my experience, it has been something like that, where the web will lead and be on the forefront, and maybe things will spill out over that. I haven't, in my experience, seen something like an advancement campaign that then turns around and becomes, you know, the beginnings, let's say, of a brand story and a brand platform that work. Not to say that that's not out there, and could it happen? Yeah, it actually could, and I could see opportunities to do that. I just haven't come across those.
Fair enough. Well, I have one more question, and it's actually, I think, a really great way to wrap up the Q&A here. But before I ask it, just a quick reminder to everyone who's still with us. We are recording today's session, including the Q&A, and you will get an email from me early next week with a link to both this on-demand recording and the slide deck. So worry not if you have to take off because it's the top of the hour. We'll see you next week. All right, so last question, Voltaire and Pat. This can obviously be a long game, right? Filled with tons of bureaucracy. In a project like this, how do you keep yourself and like-minded marketing teammates from burning out when progress inevitably winds up stalling out?
Whiskey? Sorry. Pat, I'll let you take the first part of that answer.
Oh, wait, there's more? I thought whiskey covered it. Okay. Look, launching, launching a new brand platform and developing this is some of the most exciting work that I'm ever involved in. And it's frustrating. You have to just go, look at, there are going to be speed bumps here. There are going to be things that go sideways. That's just the nature of the game. I mean, I've never known a process that's run just seamless. There's always things that come into play. That's fine. Understand that it's going to be a long haul. Now, where you can take some solace and where you should take some, what should I say, confidence and things that will keep you going is the progress that you are making, right? All good branding platforms, all good web programs should have key milestones. So you can always look back going, well, hey, 6 months ago, we weren't even here. A year ago, we weren't even talking about this, and now we're here. Look at, I know that might sound a little like pap and just like, hey, just, rah, rah, that type of thing. It really works. And it's really important to be able to see those milestones and be able to reflect back going, look, this is how far we have come. This is where we need to go, right? And I think by the time you're into this process, people do want to see this completed. They do want to see the end result. Sometimes it just may take a little bit longer than we all want.
Voltaire, anything to add?
I completely endorse what Pat's saying. You basically, the projects that we have are long projects. And like Pat said, no Gantt chart has ever survived an encounter with reality, right? So for me personally, what I look back to is, all right, what successes have we had? What can we celebrate? How far have we come? And to remind myself, or to have you remind yourselves about why you're doing this and why it's important.
Yep.
And whiskey.
Yeah, and just let me add onto this is, when you have a partner like BVK, like mStoner, and people that have been through this, you could say, hey, look, this isn't unusual, right? This has happened before. This is what's going to happen next. This is how we're going to get through it. It helps a lot too.
And on that note, Pat, Voltaire, I will thank both of you again for just leading a terrific and inspiring session today. Folks, we are so excited for this entire summer of webinars, July, August, and September. There's great programming, and we really hope that you'll consider submitting an application to enter the Shark Tank. All right, we'll see you next time. We'll see you in July for a webinar on brand architecture, and until then, have a great afternoon. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.